I don't know if you guys have been aware of this because this is the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. 181 current and former FEMA officials released a scathing letter called the Katrina Declaration, warning that Trump-era budget cuts, staff reductions, and political interference have eroded key disaster response. We're talking about 181 current and former FEMA officials. And the city delayed operational contracts. They reduced climate science grants. They rolled back so many of the things that came out of Hurricane Katrina, and they weakened the mitigation programs that would mitigate a lot of these natural disasters, and warned that the recent deadly flooding in Texas showed the strain in capacity, even though President Trump has lent a helping hand to Governor Abbott to support a lot of the flooding in Texas, as he should. But again, if you didn't roll back a lot of the FEMA programs, you probably wouldn't have to provide additional support because it was already in the FEMA programs. We're talking about 20 plus FEMA employees who signed a letter were reportedly suspended. Those current employees suspended, and the cabinet reports, and they confirm instability in role morale within the agency, of course, because now they're fearful of their jobs of telling the truth. See, here's the thing, ladies and gentlemen, whether you be a Republican conservative or a Democratic liberal, it does not matter. This is why you should never choose a side. You should always choose a side of truth, because governmental programs like this are to assist cities, states, towns in disaster recovery and disaster relief for the people of the United States of America. Again, America first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh. That is what we're looking at, because as we look at this, when Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans in 2005, I believe, it didn't just rip through levees and neighborhoods. It tore through the mass of America's racial inequalities, because the images still haunt thousands of mostly Black residents stranded on rooftops, in the Superdome, in floodwaters. Entire communities, over 100,000 people were left without food and clean water, medical support for days. But yet, when you looked at the nearby predominantly white parishes in the wealthier neighborhoods, federal aid and evacuation efforts moved with striking speed. So this message and this pic that you see here is unmistakable. Who gets saved in America depends on who you are and where you live. Torn to shreds. Because when I look at this, the root of the disaster actually lies in multiple failures. Because FEMA under George W. Bush was unprepared, underfunded, and politically stacked. And the director at the time, Michael Brown, he had little emergency management experience. His infamous "Brownie, you're doing a heck of a job" quote became shorthand for his incompetence. And the state of Louisiana failed to coordinate National Guard resources effectively, leaving the poorest neighborhoods unprotected and unrescued, where people were stranding on rooftops. And what about one of the most historic cities in Louisiana, New Orleans? They knew that the levees were vulnerable for years, but ignored engineering warnings. Where are these government officials at? What are you guys doing? Whatever happened to inspections and audits? And when disaster struck, guess who was more prone to be killed by this hurricane? Who to be left stranded on rooftops? And the most people who drowned during Katrina? The Black communities, Ninth Ward, New Orleans East. They were abandoned first. See, it wasn't just government. That's what we would like to believe. But it was the Red Cross initially that delayed entering New Orleans, citing safety concerns, leaving evacuees at the Superdome without critical supplies. And insurance companies dragged their feet on payouts, leaving Black homeowners who often had fewer legal resources. And then things became stuck in litigation in court. while white communities were rebuilt first. So Louisiana, decimated by Katrina. Predominantly white communities, rescued first, resource first, support first, not equally, not separate but equal, separate but unequal. What neighborhoods got built first? Not at the same time. And contractors under FEMA, $62 billion reconstruction budget funneled money to political connected firms like Halliburton. You guys remember Halliburton back in the day when they was talking about Katrina and all that fraudulent money that was being funneled, while small Black-owned businesses in New Orleans received scraps. Well, here's $1,000 to replace your wall. My whole store is underwater. The next business owner in the adjacent community, in the adjacent area, received $25,000. Oh, it was a different case. It was a different case. Everything is not as though it seems, ladies and gentlemen, until you dive into the details. This is where we are. So when people tell me that racism doesn't exist in America, unfortunately, it still does. Have racism in America decreased? The jury is still out. Because post-Katrina, now they had the Post-Katrina Emergency Management Reform Act. I believe they signed that in 2006. And that strengthened FEMA, making a full agency inside DHS with more authority. And it required disaster response plans to include vulnerable populations. We're talking about elderly, disabled, poor, and minorities. Then you also had the Stafford Act amendments that gave FEMA broader authority to deploy resources pre-disaster and not just after. So when we knew that a storm was coming in, we will already deploy resources to that area, so things will already be in place. So we can have storage places where they have sandbags and prefabricated ravines where you can divert water to different locations so people's homes and businesses won't be destroyed by the national disaster. This is crazy. He rolled back a lot of this legislation. What about the civil rights integration? FEMA was ordered to address racial disparities in disaster aid distribution because they had evidence of racial disparity when it came to who got help, who got supported first. And again, people would like to be very hyperbolic and emotional about it. No, the truth is a fact, and the fact is the truth in regards to Katrina. Now, if you fast forward, Trump's FEMA rolled back much of this legislation that basically quietly stripped away a lot of these safeguards. A lot of this didn't get highlighted like other legislation and executive orders that President Trump either rolled back or signed into law. Because the 2018 FEMA strategic plan, it gutted the equity language, focused instead on self-reliance and state responsibility. Self-reliance during a flood? At this point in time, ladies and gentlemen, if I lived in Louisiana, I don't care if I live in an apartment or a house. I'm going to have some inflatable boat. I'm going to have something in case this occurs again, because it's damn to happen again. And hopefully they reinforce those levees. They also did rollbacks of civil rights oversight because FEMA stopped tracking racial disparities in disaster aid, essentially erasing the very lessons of Katrina. Again, there were actual evidence and reports of racial disparity, but yeah, we're not going to track that no more because Trump rolled that back. We don't have to track it no more. What about Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria? That happened in 2017. And again, echoes of Katrina, slow aid, undercounted deaths. Later estimated at nearly 3,000 people perished. And we're talking about disproportionate negligence of poor non-white communities. And then the budget cuts. Trump tried to cut FEMA funding by hundreds of millions of dollars, shifting resources towards ICE and border enforcement instead. What in the world happened to America first? Oh, well, he diverted those funds because we have a bigger problem of illegal immigration. Not if a flood, not if a typhoon, hurricane, tornado hits a city, town, or state near you, then you will want that hundreds of $millions in FEMA and disaster relief and support. Yes, you would. And I believe that the authority lies in the Stanford Act of 1988, which gives presidents immense control over FEMA declarations, because FEMA is housed inside of DHS, no less. And its priorities are political, not neutral. Congress has a very limited appetite to push reforms. And the courts defer heavily to executive discretion when it comes to these emergencies. So when Trump deprioritized minority communities in disaster aid, the infrastructure allowed him to do it unchecked. He's doing whatever the hell he wants to do. And I like the fact that you have Republicans, you have people in the MAGA base calling foul on some of the things. Then they haven't called foul on this, but they called foul on the 600,000 Chinese students. I wonder for people, when I look at certain political and news channels and right-winged or right-leaning libertarian channels that are Trump supporters, are they ever going to call out some of the heinous things that Trump has been doing? Because again, I will acknowledge some of the legislation that could benefit America that Trump is doing, but I'm gonna call out some of the chaotic things that will leave a lot of people in turmoil when it comes to this, ladies and gentlemen. Because if anything that we learned from Katrina, it forced America to confront its racism in disaster response. It created reforms that on paper made FEMA stronger. And even when it comes to environmental racism, meaning that you have Black communities near factories that emit harmful chemical smoke, that people in those towns and areas have been catching cancer and all sorts of other diseases from it. It's amazing the amount of racism that America has that people just can't see on the surface. So if a police officer is not beating you across the head or shooting you in the back, there's no racism. Racism, as I stated, when we say that it's systematic, these are the systems where we're talking about. Where you serve other communities first, where other communities get more resources, more support, where more other communities are rebuilt first. This is what we're talking about. Because those reforms that Katrina put in place, those reforms were undone. So Black communities remain the most vulnerable in every major disaster, either New Orleans, Houston, Puerto Rico, Florida, you name it. And the truth is, Katrina actually showed us that who lives and who dies is very political. And Trump's FEMA policies have dragged us back to the same place we swore we'd never return to. So don't tell me that racism does exist. Not only does it exist on the surface, it also exists in the systems.